Okay, it's noon, so let's go ahead and get started, and we'll try to end around 12:50. I know we have classes at 1 o'clock. It's good to see everybody here. I know we have a lot of people also online as well. And so good to have you all with us. This is our final ministry connection for the semester. And Tim also has been sharing with us about evangelism today. We'll be talking about building an effective evangelistic culture. And so look forward to hearing what he has to share. Let's go to God in prayer as we begin. God, thank you so much for the gift of this time that we can gather together. Some are enjoying food. God, thank you for the ways you provide for us. And to just reflect together on how we can better participate in what you're doing in this world and how we can better just proclaim your goodness in a world that, at least in some contexts, just increasingly becomes skeptical and increasingly raises questions about you, about your word. God, we know that we just are in desperate need of your spirit to lead us and empower us and to bless us. God, we pray for our churches that we can just be faithful to you in our context. And so, God, we just give all this to you and ask your blessings to be with us. So again, God, thank you for the gift of your presence today. Bless our discussion. Help us to see more clearly how we can be faithful to this task of sharing your goodness in our world today. This is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen.
Can I check the PowerPoint real quick to make sure? Yeah, thank you. All right, thank you all for being here today. I like these ministry connection ideas, and I appreciate you trusting me to be part of it here in the fall. We're talking about something I think we all care about, trying to be effective in reaching out with the gospel in our changing culture that we understand we're all living in. And so I think we all agree it's important. Evangelism is at the heart of the story of the Bible, bringing souls back to God. It's at the heart of the Christian faith. And so it always encourages me just to talk about it, just remind myself of its importance. And so I hope it's been the same for you. Let me go through real quick what we've seen so far, and then we'll pick up. And today's topic is actually my favorite one of the three we've done. So I hope it'll be encouraging to you. So our first session, we talked about the evangelism crisis and some healthier perspectives. What do we mean by the evangelism crisis? It is a changing culture, in our culture anyway. And so people who profess to be Christians, that number has been decreasing. People who go to church regularly, that number is decreasing. Christians feel frustrated and ill-equipped. They don't know how to reach out. They realize the things we used to do to reach out don't seem to work the way they used to. And ministers aren't immune to this either. And so Christians, if you remember the study that always jumps out at me, one of the studies said that they had that list of all the things Christians do and asked Christians to rank them, and evangelism was last on the list of things Christians would be most excited about. And so that's sort of our world. People don't know how to handle it a lot of the time, how to reach out. You need to put back on it. I may have lost my marker. There we go. Thank you. Some healthier perspectives. Theological, don't forget, the gospel hasn't changed. It can change lives in any context, any culture. God hasn't gone anywhere. God has a way of flipping these things around whenever we think the trends are going against Christianity. So it's not a time to lose hope. Statistically, Christianity is growing all over the world. We're in one of the more difficult contexts, but we try to keep perspective and remind Christians of that. Social, healthier perspectives we talked about in the first session. There's still a lot of opportunities in our culture. One that jumped out at me, I think I mentioned last time that Dr. Clower had told me about that book, The Great De-Churching, that's getting a lot of attention right now. And he says that 40 million people in the last 25 years have stopped attending church regularly. But one of the big findings in that book, 30 million of them are not against Christianity. They didn't have bad experiences. They don't hate Christianity. They're not that person. They just got busy. They've just gotten caught up in the American lifestyle, and they're doing other things. And so one of the things he's pointing out is those are just huge open doors in our culture. Sometimes we picture people who aren't Christians as against Christianity, and a lot of times that's just not the case. And then procedural, healthier perspective. We want to think like missionaries. How can we reach out in a culture that doesn't trust people, that has mixed feelings about Christianity, that's too busy, that's a little sensitive, that doesn't like to be pressured? How do you reach out in that context? We just want to think about that. If we were just walking into America, how would you do it? Sorry, I lost it again. All right, and then from that first session also, 2 more healthier perspectives from the Great Commission passage in Matthew 28. Evangelism is not just my job. It's not just your job. It is our job together as the church. So it's not anything that I don't want to put too much anxiety on myself as if I've got to save people. It's something we do together. And it's God's mission. He's leading the way. Jesus says in Matthew 28:20, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. God is doing things. And so we talked about prayer. If we could just renew prayer, evangelistic prayer in our lives, that would be a great outcome of all this. Last time, our second session, we talked about an evangelism roadmap for post-Christian culture. I tried to look at, this is from my dissertation that I did here at Harding Grad, and talked about what are the things people are saying we need to think differently. And the 6th one is what we're going to talk about today. So this will lead us right into today. Now, first of all, patience with a longer process of spiritual growth. You say, well, I want to go out and baptize someone today. Well, they might not be ready for that today, but you can encourage the steps. People are starting from further away in our culture, and it takes time. We've got to be patient with people and let faith grow naturally. We talked about the personality idea. We'll bring that up again today, actually. Number 3, the right motives for evangelism. Why do we reach out? We hope we genuinely love people. We don't want to be salesmen. We don't want to be people who are pressuring people into buying things they don't want. Like we want to love people, whether they ever become Christians or not. We want to love them. Talk about building relationships. Most people who become Christians in our culture, it's through a relationship. Maybe that's true in our culture, but in all cultures, but it's definitely true in ours. And so we need to be building relationships with people. Again, even if they never become Christians, have coffee with people, invite them over to eat. If we're doing that, that leads to conversations and leads to decisions. And then number 5, the last one we talked about last time, faith conversations. Not preaching at people, but talking with people, asking questions about their faith background, getting to know them, showing interest, trying to encourage something, trying to figure out what's the next step for this person, and offer an invitation or an encouragement. Those are some of the things we talked about last time. These are the ways people are finding are effective in our culture. And so then number 6, the importance of church culture. A lot of the writings today emphasize you're not doing this by yourself. There is a family alongside you. It's not just Lone Ranger evangelism. It is God's church reaching out together. So that's what we're going to talk about today, building an evangelistic church culture. Here's what I want to do with it. I want to talk about the importance of culture for a few minutes. And then I've got 4 things. 4 things I think you'll find in the writings about evangelism that they say churches need to do to try to build an evangelistic culture. And the reason this is my favorite idea, there's a multiplying effect for evangelism when you can build a culture. When it's not just you, that there's a multiplying effect alongside it. And so this feels like this is what we're aiming for, if we can build evangelistic churches. All right, so we'll talk about how important it is, my 4 things, and then I'll try to leave some time at the end to open it up if you have anything you'd like to share. Again, I realize I'm not the only one in the room that has studied evangelism, so I'd love your thoughts as well. So let's talk about culture. How important is culture? Peter Drucker is a guy who was well known in the management world. He's written a lot of books on business management, and his quote that's always well known is, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And what he means by that is you can have all the strategies you want, but if it's not who you really are, it's going to come short. It's going to come up short. I'm not against strategies. I'm not against churches saying, let's see how we can reach out better, but you want to become who you really are. That's the highest level of an evangelistic congregation. And so you want to make it who you are as much as possible. It's probably something we've experienced. Whether you've been at a church camp or a mission trip, maybe a church family, where just the feeling of the group together made you want to take steps of faith. Like just we're all serving God together, and it makes you want to grow in your faith. Can we approximate that in some way in our churches? That's what we're aiming for, a culture that encourages people to take steps of faith toward God. And you think about it when you invite somebody to come. So let's say you've been building relationships with someone in your life, you invite them to come to church. what do you hope they will see? And what do you hope they won't see? That's what we're talking about with this culture idea. You hope it won't feel cold and dead and judgmental and all that. What you hope is people will be kind to the person you bring, and they'll meet them and they'll get to know them. You hope they'll connect with somebody else in some way. You hope the worship will be encouraging and God-centered. You hope the preacher will say things from Scripture that will help encourage their faith, but not sound like a jerk as they do it. There's these things you hope people will see in the culture of a church when you invite somebody. And if those things aren't there, it limits how effective you can be in evangelism. If you're worried you're going to invite somebody and they're not going to see this is a genuinely faith-building culture. And then the last one I've got on here is thinking about when someone becomes a Christian. So let's say you get more effective in your life. You're praying for people in your life to become Christians. You're building relationships. You're having conversations. You're inviting them to church, and those lead to Bible studies, and you're helping people become Christians. You still need a church family alongside you. Like, there's still going to be this point where, God's church is part of God's plan for people's lives. And so even if you help someone become a Christian in your life, you need a church where they can grow and they can continue building their faith. So we've got to have cultures, not just good personal evangelists. We've got to have healthy churches that can help this process, or there's limits to what we can do. And cultures in the Bible. John 13, verses 34 and 35. Jesus says, I'll read verse 35. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. That's a culture verse. People will know you're my follower if you love each other. People can see love in your culture, the way you treat each other. They're going to see the connection with Jesus Christ. And so there's a great start. Let's make sure our churches are genuinely caring about each other. What about Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47? The first church, after 3,000 are baptized, they're always together. They're committed to it. And I think maybe commitment alongside love is what you see in this section. Verse 44, all who believed were together and had all things in common. They're selling their stuff to help each other out. Verse 45, every day by day, they're with each other. They're eating their meals together. It doesn't surprise us in verse 47 that people were being saved daily. There was a culture element there in Acts 2. It was a genuinely Christian culture where they're committed to their faith. And people have often pointed out, too, on the culture idea in the New Testament, that Paul's letters that he writes to churches, he rarely, if ever, says, you guys go evangelize. What he usually says is, you be unified. You love each other. You draw closer to God, and then you'll be lights in the world. You'll naturally be lights in the world. And so this healthy churches, which naturally produce evangelism, is, I think, a New Testament theme also. All right, so let's ask them with the rest of our time. 4 things. What can churches do to build evangelistic culture? So first of all, I'm sorry, if you're here in the room with us, you may not be able to see the top, so I'll try to make it clear. Number 1, a culture of inviting and hospitality. A culture of inviting and hospitality. People sometimes ask, okay, what are the open doors in our culture? Inviting people is an open door in our culture. Door knocking may not be an open door. I'm not against door knocking. I think we just need to have lower goals for door knocking. We're just trying to plant seeds. But door knocking may or may not be an open door. Inviting is an open door. And this is what the statistics say. So there's a guy named Rick Richardson who wrote a book in 2019 called You Found Me. I'm going to quote it several times today. I think he's got some good stuff. So in this part of it, he surveyed 2,000 unchurched individuals. And he found 51%, these are unchurched people, 51% said they would come if a friend invited them. 55% said they'd come if they were invited by their family. That's a big open door. Tom Rainer's book, The Unchurched Next Door, found the numbers even higher, but here's how he worded it. If someone, they said, if I were invited by someone I know, and they would walk in the door with me, that number goes to 80%. So maybe something about walking in the door of a church that you haven't been to, or an event you haven't been to. If someone I knew invited me and they'll walk in with me, 80% say they'll come. That's a big open door. And so we need to try as churches to capitalize on inviting. People will come if we invite them. So yeah, let me put some bullet points up here. It is an open door in our culture. What it does, if we have inviting events in our churches, it helps connect our relationships to the church. So again, we're all trying to build relationships. We're trying to get coffee with people and have people over to eat and all those sorts of things. This gives a chance to come meet our church family. And again, hopefully find a really genuinely Christian culture. And so if we can have friends and family days and vacation Bible schools and trunk or treats, whatever you think about that, or praying for Memphis Sundays or whatever we have, let's try to have those because they help connect those relationships. And then when people come, we've got to be ready to show hospitality in our assemblies. And I hope all of us can lead the way on this, that when visitors come, we don't want them to be ignored. We don't want them to feel like they're not really welcome. We want to be the ones getting to know people and encouraging them and trying to connect with them. Again, from Richardson's You Found Me book, one of the things he did here, he studied churches that were growing by conversions, not just growing because people were moving in, but growing by conversions. And he looked for predictive factors. In fact, last time you might remember, one of the predictive factors was if your church members are having religious conversations with people. He said, I can predict that group is going to grow by evangelism because people are having conversations. The number one predictive factor was, can the unchurched come in and be shown hospitality in your congregation? He said, that's the number one predictive factor for churches to grow by reaching new people. Can someone who doesn't have a church background come into an event or a worship service and they're going to be treated with hospitality, whether they're a Christian or not, whether they look like a Christian or not, whatever that means, and people show them a sense of hospitality. And then also in worship, how do you show hospitality in worship? I'm going to appeal here to 1 Corinthians 14, verses 23 through 25. If you remember this context, Paul is writing to the Corinthian church, and the whole chapter is about their worship assemblies. But here he's upset at them because they were so interested in tongue speaking that they weren't thinking about how this would be seen by visitors in their churches. So verse 23, he says, if the whole church assembles together and all speak in tongues, and ungifted men or unbelievers enter, so notice that, you're going to have some visitors in their congregations also. He said, well, then not say that you're mad. If you're just speaking in tongues and languages no one understands and no one's translating, they're not going to understand anything. He says, but if you're making things understandable, verse 24, if everyone's prophesying and an unbeliever or an ungifted man enters, he's convicted by all, he's called to account by all, the secrets of his heart are disclosed, he will fall on his face and worship God, declaring that God is certainly among you. So if I can paraphrase that, if we can make sure our worship assemblies are understandable to people who are visiting, that may encourage them to grow in faith themselves. So how do you do that? Well, a lot of churches have Lord's Supper devotionals to explain, here's what we're doing with the Lord's Supper. We don't just assume everyone knows what we're doing. If you're preaching, we don't just want to assume people know the stories, because they don't. I don't just want to assume people know the passages, because they don't. We want to talk as if unbelievers, and not only that, I mean, you got kids growing up who are just now starting to pay attention for the first time. Like, there's always going to be people in our assemblies who don't know everything. And so we want to make sure we're explaining things. One of the reasons I think Tim Keller was so popular with people, and Tim Keller, a Presbyterian minister, if you don't know him, who's written a lot of books and just recently passed away. But one of the reasons people loved him was he was good at speaking as if unbelievers were listening and explaining things kindly. And he would often say things like, from the outside of the Christian faith, you might think that's crazy to put yourself second or third. But from the inside, we believe that Jesus put himself second for us. And now we see the goodness of lifting each other. He would explain the dynamics of seeing it from the outside and seeing it from the inside. And it helps even Christians to think through it in that sense. And so even the way we worship, and I'm not saying being visitor focused. I'm not saying change our whole worship services for visitors. But I think this passage is saying to be visitor conscious, not visitor focused, but visitor conscious. People are listening who are not Christians. And that's especially true in the internet age also, where everything's going on YouTube and all that. We need to speak as if Christians are listening. So the first thing, let's develop a culture of inviting and hospitality. Number two, let's develop a culture of doing good, both in the church and in the community. So again, Richardson's book, he says, if churches want to be outreach oriented, one big obstacle is some churches feel like they have to choose between teaching people and serving people. And so I don't know how big a problem that is. He sees it as a big problem. And so if we don't have to choose between teaching people and serving people. That's his point, is churches should be doing both. Jesus did both, right? Jesus is healing people and helping people. Next time you read through the Gospels, it might be worth noticing, as Jesus is healing people, sometimes he talks to them about faith in that first encounter. Sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he says, go show yourself to the priest, and the 10 lepers go running off. Sometimes he heals the blind man in John 9, for example, and he doesn't say anything about faith. And then later, when the blind man comes back, now we start a conversation about it. So even Jesus shows us it's okay to help people and just keep your eyes open for the right moment to talk about faith. He says churches sometimes struggle with that. I hope that Galatians 6:10 is who we are. It says, so then, while we have opportunity, let us do good to all people. Notice that, all people, and especially to those from the household of faith. We want to build churches that are doing good to all people. We want to especially take care of each other. There's a special way we need to be helping each other, like that church in Jerusalem. But we want to do good to everybody and keep our eyes open for the right moments to have conversations about faith. Now, it's okay to help and just keep your eyes open. Let me share some brainstorm ideas if churches are thinking through, okay, how can we do this better? I would say, number one, try to honor and celebrate the service that's already happening. I think every church has good things going on, and sometimes just no one stops to point out, hey, this is a good thing. You know, this group that's been going to the nursing home for 30 years. Hey, that's a good thing. You know, they're there showing kindness and love to people who really need kindness and love in their life. Hey, this group of ladies that's been fixing meals for 30 years. That's a really good, that's a Christ-like thing that's going on here. Just to highlight those things, just to celebrate that there's already a service and Christian love being shown in the community, in your church family. Number two, I would say just reflect on your community. What are the needs and the ways your specific church family can connect with those? So if you have teachers in your congregation, maybe think about adopting a school, and maybe the school they work at, so there's a relationship context there already. Maybe you can do some things for the teachers a few times a year, send little notes during test week or whatever. Find ways to help out with volunteer activities for the kids where it's appropriate. If you have nurses in your congregation, see if there's a way maybe to connect, and in the break rooms, maybe you can send some little notes from your church family to say we appreciate what the doctors and nurses are doing. Is there a way in your community? Is there a problem that your church family can fill, whatever that is? Just to try to open our eyes to what can we do to show love to our communities. And then number three, I would say, if possible, try to do things that are relational. It's still good to do things that aren't relational. We, at Great Oaks, for example, we constantly all year round have drives where people can bring items for the LeBonner family pantry, and somebody just brings them down there. That's a good thing. It's not a really relational thing. You know, we're not really getting to talk with people. We're still showing Christian love. Good thing I'm not in favor of canceling it in any way. But if you can make things relational, maybe like volunteering with the school you've adopted. That's a better way, because then you're building relationships, and even more things can come out of that. So if you want to be a church that is evangelism oriented, let's find ways to serve. And so let me end this second one by mentioning a few ways this will help us if we can build a culture where we are doing good both in and out of the church. First of all, for Christians, when Christians are serving both in and out of the church, it builds an outreach mentality that we don't always have. It helps us think bigger than we sometimes do. To think, hey, we're going to help out this school, or going to help out this part of our community for a special day. It just helps you think bigger. It encourages those who are already serving to do it even more. For people in the community, they get to see God's love, that this church really cares. There is, even if not everybody's skeptical about the Christian faith in our culture, there is an element of skepticism in our about Christianity in our culture. And some people just don't think it's real. They think Christians are all hypocrites. Well, when we're serving, it shows people this is real. When we're sacrificing ourselves for others, it shows that it's real. And then I would add this one too. Visitors in our churches. When we're inviting visitors, for them to see that we're serving, it helps them also see that this is real. And it draws them a little closer to the goodness of Jesus Christ. And so this, if we can develop a culture of serving people and just keeping our eyes open for the right opportunities to talk, that'll make a big difference. Number 3, we can do this one real fast because we've already talked about this one a little bit in our previous ones. Number 3, a culture where everyone contributes to Christ's mission. So what the books will say is we need to make sure we're not just saying everyone has to be Paul. Not everyone is the Apostle Paul. But if we can get everyone saying, what can I do to contribute to the mission of the church? That makes a big difference. And again, Matthew 28 is not a command just for any one individual person. In fact, it's impossible probably for any one individual person. He says in verse 19 to make disciples of all the nations. There is no way I can make a disciple of every single nation on earth. I don't even know what that number would be, how many different places I would have to go. This is a church-wide command here. And Jesus, he's speaking generationally even at the end of verse 20. Even to the end of the age, he says, I'm with you. And so this is something we all do together. This is something the church does. And anything the church does together, this is Romans chapter 12, verses 4 through 6, points out that we're one body, but we have many different members, and we contribute different things. We have different gifts that God has given us, so we all want to contribute what we can. So let me put the list up here one more time. It's come up a little bit in all 3 of our sessions. The evangelism personalities from Mark Middleberg's books. I think they're helpful. I think they help Christians. If we can teach these to people, that even in the New Testament, you see people contributing in different ways, and how everyone, sometimes we just look at those top 2, Peter being direct or Paul being intellectual. We think that's evangelism right there. But all these things contribute to evangelism. And so we need everyone's talents and everyone's gifts contributing in different ways and honoring those and recognizing that they do contribute different things. So number 3, we want every member, as much as possible, want to build an evangelistic culture, everybody contributing what they can. And then number 4, a culture that keeps the evangelistic temperature high. That's a phrase you hear, or a term, I guess, you hear in a lot of these books, is evangelistic temperature. So you can sort of imagine what that means. We're thinking about evangelism more. It's on our minds more as a group. So how do you keep the evangelistic temperature high in a church family? First of all, I've got Romans 1, 15 and 16 up here. Paul was obviously someone who had an evangelistic temperature in his life. He says, for my part, I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. So Paul obviously has an evangelistic mindset. How can we build that in a church culture? Not just me personally, but in a church culture. I've got a few things that I think you'll find, and I think some of them I may just add in on my own as we go through this also. So the first one I've got, try to set a high spiritual tone in our church families. What do I mean by that? We are really trying to follow Jesus Christ here. You want that to be the tone of your church family. You don't want your church family tone to just be likable or just be relevant or just be creative or just be fun and entertaining. Like, I'm not saying things are wrong with elements of that, but you want the main goal here. We are trying to follow Jesus Christ. And that naturally calls people to want to be part of that. It is Jesus that is the message. And if we can set a high spiritual tone, I think that helps people want to take steps of faith. Those of us who preach, they recommend that we make sure we keep this on everybody's mind by regularly preaching on evangelistic themes. My 6 to 8 times a year comes from Stan Granberg, a class I audited here at Harding years ago. He came and did an evangelism class. And he recommended 6 to 8 times a year. We're talking about some sort of evangelistic sermon. And it doesn't just have to be, let's go evangelize. It could be things like the blessings of salvation. And just remind everybody, this is what we're all about. We're all about salvation in Jesus and all the blessings that come with it. And we want everybody to have those. So the more those of us who speak keep that on people's minds, it helps us all think more evangelistically. I've got here also leadership, try to model soul-focused activities. Soul-focused activities. In other words, if our elders and our deacons and our ministers and our Bible class teachers, if in some way we can all be praying, just some of the things we talked about, we can all be praying for souls. If we can all be the ones who are meeting our visitors when they come, like that sort of feels like that we should be the front line of that we should be the ones meeting people when they walk in the door, that we should model when the unchurched come in, as Richardson talks about, that they're going to be treated with kindness. We should be the ones leading the way on that. We should be the ones, if possible, if somebody's come for a while, try to go get coffee with them or try to have lunch with them and talk about faith in some way. We should be the ones, if someone's been visiting a while, to ask if they're interested in sitting down for a Bible study. So if the leadership can model these things, that helps raise the evangelistic temperature. Also, as we've already said a little bit, I'll add something to it here. Have regular outreach events, whether inviting events or having a family and friends day. Encourage everybody to invite. It keeps the evangelistic temperature up. We're having a seminar on why Christians believe what they believe. Invite people to come. Also put going on there, an outreach event about going. The Mount Juliet Church of Christ outside of Nashville, talking to some of their leaders at one point. What they have, I think they still have it. There's a group that goes every year to some congregation and does like a door knocking, either gospel meeting or Bible or a vacation Bible school every summer. They take a big group, 100, 150 people. And one thing one of the ministers told me years ago is, he said, I don't think anything has set the culture of our church more than that trip. Just every year having a group going out and as somebody said it, exercising their evangelistic muscles by going out and knocking on doors and just having conversations and try to encourage people to come and either a gospel meeting or vacation Bible school. And then they'd come back more interested in evangelism. And what they started doing was every 5 years, they would have that group have a campaign there in Mount Juliet, where we have a seminar of some sort, invite somebody to come in and talk about the Christian faith. And we're going to reach out to our own community in that way. And so just having regular things like that helps build a culture that's thinking about evangelism, whether it's mission trips or local outreach events or just events spread out through the year. One good way to do it. This is one you see a lot, and this is something we're going to try to do better at Great Oaks. Have regular evangelism training. Several years ago at Great Oaks, we had several marriages. It's been about 10 years ago now. We had several marriages that were struggling. And what we decided, what our elders decided was, why don't we do something for marriage encouragement every year? So every spring, we're going to have something. We're going to have a seminar or a Bible class or something. One thing that came out of my dissertation study was, and it didn't come just from me, but some people said, why don't we do something similar with evangelism? Just every year to have something that encourages or teaches. I mean, if we are in a culture where Christians believe in evangelism but don't know how to do it, then let's try to equip that as much as we can. And so we're going to try to have a Bible class one year. And then we're going to try to have maybe a big sermon series the next year. And we're going to try to have a seminar maybe the next year. And we're going to try to have a smaller group maybe that meets on Monday nights or something to really dig into evangelism. Just to keep every year the congregation thinking about evangelism and try to train people to how can you do it effectively in our culture, that patient relationship building conversation process, just to keep people thinking about that. I've also got up here, if we're going to have a high evangelistic temperature, give church resources for evangelism. Maybe helpful to put out like a conversation table in your lobby with information about the church or information about questions people often ask about the church or how to become a Christian. Put some resources out there. Maybe some resources if someone has the chance to study the Bible with someone in their life. Put those things there so people can can have access to that and be ready to use them when they come up. And then the last one I've got on this for keeping the evangelistic temperature up. Let's celebrate baptisms and steps of faith. Luke 15, Jesus tells us heaven is celebrating when people are coming to the Lord. Let's make sure we're doing the same. And now you can decide what that means for your congregation. For us, we try to have special prayers. We try to put them on the front of the bulletin. We try to make sure they're shown all the love and encouragement that the occasion deserves. You want to make sure that's being celebrated. You promote what you celebrate. You might have heard that phrase before. If you're celebrating something, you're promoting it to happen even more. And so when we really celebrate that people take steps of faith, it just reminds everyone this is what we're all about. And so maybe that's a good way also. So these are my 4 things. Let me say this and then I'll read them one more time. I hope you and I individually keep working on trying to be more effective in our own personal evangelism in our lives, building relationships, having conversations, all that. But there is a multiplying effect when we can build churches that are all together thinking about evangelism. These are 4 ways people say you can do that, and maybe we can all do them a little bit better. Let's build a culture of inviting and hospitality. Let's build a culture of doing good, of serving both in the church and out of the church as well. Let's everybody contribute to Christ's mission, all the different evangelism personalities. Let's celebrate those, teach those, and let's try to keep the evangelistic temperature high by reminding people this is what we're all about. We're really all about following Jesus. We want other people to do the same thing if possible. My last thing before I see if you have anything you want to add, share, criticize, whatever. Remember too, building a culture takes time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. You're going to have a million things that go on in churches that distract and pull in different directions. So it's going to take time to build a culture, and cultures are constantly in process. They don't stay the same. So don't try to push these things too quickly. But I think my favorite part of local ministry, I've decided, is just the simple process of what is the next step for our church family? Like what can we do a little bit better? What can we do a little bit better? What can we do a little bit better? And if you do that over time, pressure over time, consistent good pressure over time produces good things. And so maybe we can just start taking little steps over time to build this type of culture in our churches. All right, let me stop there. We have a few minutes before we dismiss everybody to go to your 1 o'clocks or whatever you got going on. Any thoughts? Anything you like about those, don't like? Anything you'd add, contribute, ways you've seen them in your life? Let me just step back and open it up to you if you have anything to say. And if you don't, that doesn't hurt my feelings either. If it's been so perfectly said that we can say a prayer and move on, we can do that too. But I'd love to hear your thoughts if you have thoughts.
Tim, I like the adopting a school thing. That sounds really cool because church, we have small groups and we do a serve every month. We're supposed to do, and sometimes it's like, okay, what are we going to do?
You're right.
What are we going to do? And I really like that idea. I'm going to approach leaders with that.
Go for it. Yeah, it sounds really good. And it's something we've done for 10 years maybe, and some years we've done it better than others. But one thing I think about with the adopted school, so when we were early in that process, and we've adopted Kate Bond Elementary, which is a public school near us. And so I'm going out to deliver something. We've been doing this about a year. I'm delivering something to the office there at the school. And one of the administrative assistants, she said, "So you're with Great Oaks?" I said, "Yeah, I'm one of the ministers over there." She said, "That sounds like a really cool church." And maybe you're laughing because we're not a cool church. I don't know. But what was interesting to me was she knew nothing about us. Like she knew nothing. She's never visited. She's never been on the website. Like all she knows is people show up here every now and then and give stuff to the teachers. And so in her mind, that sounds like a cool church. And so and that was when it's something like that, it's consistent. You can build relationships and get to know people. COVID cut off a lot of those. We're trying to rebuild a lot of the relational part of our Kate Bond stuff. What is the thing that White Station recently started doing? there's some program, if you talk to Steve Clover about it, he'd
Yeah.
love to tell you about it. It's for fourth graders.
Right.
Academy 4.
Academy 4 maybe,
Academy
yeah,
4.
where they're trying to send out volunteers to meet with all the fourth graders once a month or something. Very relational, very,
You're assigned a mentoree, a student and an adult, work together throughout the academic year.
and that seems really cool.
It
And
is.
again, it's relational, it's outreach oriented, gets everybody thinking about outreach. Only good things can come from that. Yeah, so there's lots of good ideas. And every church has different people that work in different areas. Like surely there's a way to connect your church family to something,
Yeah.
whether it's a school or a hospital or whatever. Good thought.
Not that was your thought.
I wish it was. I wish I could say I invented the adopt a school idea, but I did not invent the adopt a school idea. One thing that's been good for us with Cape Bond too, we have a Spanish speaking ministry and there's a lot of Hispanics at Cape Bond. And so through the years, some of our Spanish speakers have gone to translate for events and stuff. So there's just been neat ways to connect with that. Yeah.
I know, I remember Steve Porter saying in one of his classes that there was a school right next to where he was in Texas. And they just started doing some open doors like crazy, yeah, so,
And that may be the Academy 4 thing.
maybe, I don't know.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah.
I know, at Cape Bond, like Bellevue Baptist has a big, thing where they help, I think it's third graders try to read better. People have identified that third grade reading as a big fork in the road for education, which way you're going in life. And so they send volunteers out all the time to help third graders read better. So there's just a lot of neat things you can do. Any other thoughts on building an evangelistic church culture?
You mentioned equipping the members.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea on how to do that?
Well, I sort of like what I said we're going to try to do. Do one something a year for evangelism. And if it's a church-wide thing 1 year, and then maybe a Bible class the next year, and a seminar the next year, just something each year to keep people thinking about how to do it in our culture. And maybe these types of things we talked about are some of the things you can share in those classes. There's good books out there that you could take and adapt. Richardson's book that I've mentioned a few times, like you could take and adapt it into a Bible class. And then too, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the equipping idea too, Dwight, but when we do have opportunities, and this is something I need to do better, when we do have opportunities for having Bible studies with people, to try to bring someone along with you, like bring a Christian along with you, just to let them see that context. It was really good for me as a college student to get to sit with a preacher who was having a Bible study, a consistent Bible study. And that did so much for me, just to be able to see the context and see how it works, and maybe if we can bring more people alongside those things. And so my mind's thinking now as we're going down it, if you can start even like a visiting night, take a few members that want to be part of that and go visit. If people have visited your congregation, maybe just drop off real quick a loaf of bread or something and say, hey, thanks for visiting. Or even visit people that are shut-ins. Just get people involved in those sorts of outreach things. Like that's bound to help them. You have other thoughts on that? I'd love to hear your thoughts on equipping.
Well, just, some people are just, they can make a friend of a telephone call, Other people are just not very good at that. I just wondered how you could equip people, maybe a little more reticent to interact with people. I could encourage them.
Well, I really like the evangelism personalities idea for that. If we teach people, even if you're not Paul, you can still contribute to the church's mission. And by loving people, by inviting people, one thing we found when I was doing the dissertation study at our congregation, almost everybody realizes there are evangelism opportunities in their life. That was one of the questions on the surveys we did. Are there people in your life who are not Christians? Like almost everyone has those people. And so if we can just encourage people to see, hey, pray for them, invite them, build relationships with them, those simple things, even if you're not an outgoing personality, there's things you can do. Good thoughts.
Yeah, speaking of the faith sharing personalities, could you flash that slide back up for a second, please? I think I got 4 out of the 6 written down.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I went through them real quick because we've done them before, but it's Mark Middleberg's books, and yeah, Peter's personality is very direct. That fits him. That's the type of person Dwight's talking about. Some people are very good at just speaking, hey, you need to get back in church. And people are like, hey, right, I do need to get back in church. Some people love the intellectual part. Some people are good at building relationships. If you remember, Matthew has the reception at his house for Jesus in Luke 5. And so he's got tax collectors there, and they're just getting to know each other. The blind man tells his story. He's not debating, but he says, here's what I know. I couldn't see, and then Jesus healed me, and now I can see. Like, we can all share what God has done in our life. The Samaritan woman says, I met a guy who told me everything I've ever done. Why don't you come meet him? Maybe he's the Messiah. Like, it's an inviting thing. Dorcas is just serving people. We don't know if it's in or out of the church, but she's serving people. So I like that because they're all from the New Testament. And I think Christians see that and say, oh yeah, we can all do that together. And that'll make a difference for people.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. I was looking it up and I could only find 5 from Middleburg. So looks like you've done some deeper research.
Well, so he started with 6. He has reduced it to 5. I forget which ones he combined. But his newest book, Contagious Faith, I think he does 5 of them. That'd be a good book for a Bible class, where he just walks through the 5 and then says, not only should we do these things in our personality, but here's what we can learn from each personality. So even if you're not Peter, here's what you can still learn from Peter's personality. So I forget which one he's changed. Maybe you've seen that. But Becoming a Contagious Christian is the first one I saw, and he does all 6 in that one.
Okay, looks like he combined the blind man and the Samaritan woman.
Okay, all right. What does he call it? Do you know? Do you see it there in front of you?
Yeah, he called it the story sharing approach.
Okay. So maybe the Samaritan woman is a similar. Here's what I saw. This guy knows everything I've ever done. Come meet him. Maybe so.
But she was actually running to people.
That's right.
The blind man was just, people were coming up to him, I think, so it's sort of like 2 different.
Yeah. I like the distinction between
Yeah,
the two. Yeah, I like the inviting as a different way of doing it. But Middleberg's the expert on this stuff, so I'm not gonna.
You need one more for 7.
If we could get 13, we could have a Bible class. That's what we're gonna do.
Or 12.
Advocate 7, yeah, maybe 2. They are helpful, though, I think. In fact, what Middleberg says in a couple of his books, he says he doesn't know any other concept that has helped Christians feel, what's the terminology? I think he says sets them free for evangelism better than this one. Like, when people see this, it really helps them, because so many people say, I'm not Paul, so I can't do this. Well, you can play a role, though. You can help the kingdom and help the mission. And Middleberg, he's also, he would come from a perspective that says you only need to say a prayer to become a Christian. And I don't understand that to be biblical, the way to become a Christian in the Bible. So you'll disagree with some things, but I like his approaches on evangelism in a lot of different ways. I think they're good. If you're going to read somebody from any of this, I think I'd recommend Middleberg.
It shows you kind of messes up Matthew's relational approach.
Does it? I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, Matthew on the autism, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and so what he still did, though, he invited people to his house in some way. But you're right. I've seen enough clips to see that
I
about it.
think they skipped that scene in the show.
Oh, do they really? They
Where
don't.
Matthew invites people to.
They don't show the get together at his house from the set.
Jesus, they're all walking to, and Matthew goes, so whose house are we going to? And he says, yours. Yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah.
Well, so
You got a question?
go ahead. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, relating to the keeping a church culture high, the evangelistic temperature up. I grew up in a church where we did one of those models that you talked about. There was another church that came in and spent the summer with us doing an evangelistic door knocking campaign when I was a kid. And there were some lessons that we learned that I think our approach was too limited about getting people into the water and not enough on long-term disciple making. But having grown up in that church, there was this fervor of God's doing something good here. And I learned as a kid how to go out and share my faith and talk about the gospel. And I became comfortable with that. And since then, I've not been in a church that felt that way. And so even though we fell short in some capacities, it was a beautiful thing to be a part of. A church where members became comfortable having evangelistic conversation with their neighbors, our partnership with the other church that came in and did it with us. It got me to want to be a preacher.
That's cool. That's really cool. And I've had similar thing. That's a great comment. Our congregation would take mission trips to Jamaica every year. And as I've learned more about foreign missions and good and bad ways to do that, we didn't always do those right. But I'm like you. It made me think more about evangelism. It made me think more about the gospel and, hey, I want to be part of this. And then Great Oaks has had similar. So we try to keep up with numbers and all that stuff, hopefully in healthy ways. But the 2 years we've had the most baptisms, that Mount Juliet group came for a summer event. We had they call it 12 questions. We tried to ask the community, what are some questions you would ask God if you could ask God? And so we had speakers come talk about those and put them out online. And to us, that was a big deal because we hadn't done online stuff before. There weren't a lot of people baptized during that week, but like that year and the next one were our highest baptism years we ever had. And I think it was part of the evangelistic temperature thing. I think it was, we were all just thinking about it more. We were all thinking about outreach. We were thinking about helping people who don't believe in Christianity see what it's all about. And so I do think there's something to that evangelistic temperature idea. If we can do things that help build that. Okay, that is our time. Appreciate you guys' thoughts. You always have good thoughts on these. I've enjoyed being part of it. I hope it's been helpful. Let's have a prayer and we'll let everybody go to their 1 o'clock. God, thank you so much for loving us. We're so thankful for the gospel that you've allowed it to change our lives. And Lord, we want for others to see the same thing, to see your goodness, to see your forgiveness and your transformation, the hope we have this life and the next. We beg you to open doors in our lives. We beg you to help our churches become even more evangelistic. Help us to build healthier churches that can honor you and encourage souls to follow you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank y'all. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.